The silence of the night is a thin, brittle veil, easily torn by the echoes of what lies beyond. Most people who seek solace in these hushed hours, yearning for sleep, are merely looking for a temporary reprieve from the day's cacophony. They believe that stories, particularly those whispered in the dark, are mere fabrications, dreams within dreams. But the truth about the things that truly haunt us is that they don't just reside in the shadows of our slumber. They are etched into the very fabric of our waking moments, leaving scars that only deepen with the passing of time. This hour, dedicated to tales spun from the thread of reality, is not for the faint of heart, nor for those who wish to simply drift away into oblivion. It is for those who dare to confront the unsettling specter of the unknown, for those who understand that sometimes the most terrifying truths are the ones that refuse to stay buried. The stories I will share are not mere anecdotes. They are shards of shattered lives, fragments of experiences that have clawed their way out of the abyss, demanding to be heard. They are the whispers that curl around your ear when you're alone, the feeling of being watched when no one is there, the chilling certainty that you are not, and never will be, truly alone. The moment everything changed for many was the night they stumbled upon these accounts, expecting a simple distraction, only to find themselves staring into a void that mirrored their deepest unspoken fears. It's the kind of realization that settles in your bones like a persistent, unnatural chill. You start to question the solidity of the ground beneath your feet, the safety of the walls that surround you, the very nature of the reality you so carelessly inhabit. This isn't just about ghosts or specters in the traditional sense. It's about the insidious creep of dread, the quiet unraveling of normalcy, the moments when the veil between our world and something far older, far colder, becomes impossibly thin. The stories I will recount tonight are drawn from the hushed confessions of those who have glimpsed the edge, who have heard the scratching from within the walls, who have felt the icy touch of something profoundly alien. I used to believe, like many of you, that such things belonged only to the realm of fiction, to the flickering images on a screen, or the pages of a forgotten book. I thought the darkness was merely the absence of light, a passive state, easily dispelled by a flick of a switch. But what I witnessed, what I have been forced to remember and recount, has irrevocably altered that perception. The darkness is not empty. It is pregnant with unseen life, with ancient malevolence that stirs when it senses vulnerability, when it smells fear. And the fear, my friends, is the siren song that draws it closer. You will hear of places where the air itself seems to hold its breath, where the very stones weep a nameless sorrow, and where the silence is not an absence of sound, but a deafening presence. 90% of people who hear these tales, who truly absorb their chilling essence, wish they never had. They are left with a residual unease, a haunting awareness that the world is far more dangerous and mysterious than they ever dared to imagine. This is not entertainment. It is a confrontation. It is an invitation to acknowledge the shadows that dance at the periphery of your vision, the unseen forces that brush against you in the dead of night. If you value your sanity, if you hold any hope of sleeping soundly again, then perhaps you should turn away now. But for those of you who are drawn to the abyss, for those who feel a morbid curiosity that gnaws at the edges of your reason, then lean in and listen, because what I am about to share will undoubtedly leave its mark. The stories are real, the terror is palpable, and the night is far from over. The darkness outside your window is not just an absence of light, it is a doorway. The truth about the places where despair has festered is that they don't just hold memories, they become repositories of pure, unadulterated anguish. These are not the picturesque ruins of history that draw tourists with their romanticized decay. These are sites where something fundamentally broke, something that shattered not just structures but the very essence of the human spirit. They are places where the ambient energy has curdled, where the echoes of suffering are so potent that they can manifest, twisting the environment and preying on the unwary. Imagine a house, not just old but steeped in a history of profound loss. Not a single tragedy, but a relentless cascade of them. A place where children's laughter was choked by illness, where lovers' vows withered under betrayal, where lives were extinguished, not by age, but by violence or despair. The very wood of the floorboards can absorb the tremors of desperate footsteps. The walls can become saturated with the silent screams of the tormented. And when such a place reaches a certain saturation point, it stops being merely a structure and becomes an entity, a predatory consciousness fueled by the negative energies it has hoarded. The air within becomes heavy, thick with an unseen oppression that presses down on your chest, making each breath a conscious effort. Shadows in these locations don't just fall. They writhe, elongating and contorting in ways that defy natural light, often coalescing into forms that hint at the despair that birthed them. The creaking of old houses in the wind is one thing. The sounds emanating from these sites are another. They are deliberate, guttural, and often mimic the sounds of human agony, not as a recording, but as a raw, immediate expression of the torment that resides there. These are the places where the barrier between worlds thins to a hair's breadth, allowing entities that feed on fear and despair to bleed through. I remember a particular account from a small town, a place that had once thrived but was now slowly succumbing to an unnatural blight. At its heart stood an old manor, abandoned for decades, a skeletal silhouette against a perpetually bruised sky. Locals avoided it, not just out of superstition, but out of a palpable instinctual dread that seeped from its decaying grounds. They spoke of the children who had vanished from nearby homes, of the livestock found mutilated in ways that suggested no earthly predator. The manor, they whispered, was the source, a hungry maw that had swallowed the town's prosperity and was now beginning to devour its people. One young man, driven by a mix of bravado and a desperate need to understand, decided to enter. He was a skeptic, armed with his flashlight and a defiant smirk. He emerged 3 days later, a hollowed-out shell, his eyes vacant, his words a nonsensical stream of gibberish. He never spoke coherently again, only mumbling about the singing walls and the faces in the dust. This is the essence of haunted places. They are not merely visited by spirits. They are incubators of profound psychic trauma that can manifest and perpetuate themselves. The dried bloodstains that no amount of cleaning could ever truly erase are not just blemishes. They are scars on the fabric of reality, anchors for the lingering malevolence. The cracked mirrors within these estates reflect not just distorted images, but fractured souls, glimpses into other realities where the suffering continues unabated. Consider the weight of generations of misery, the accumulated sorrow, the unresolved rage. This energy doesn't dissipate. It coalesces, it gains mass, and in places saturated with it, it can actively begin to shape its surroundings and to lure in new victims. The psychological toll is immense. The sense of being watched becoming a suffocating blanket, the feeling of dread a constant companion. And this is where the stories truly begin to intertwine with your own potential experience. Because it's not just about ancient, forgotten places. Sometimes, the contamination is closer, more insidious. It can attach itself to an object, a piece of furniture, a simple trinket that carries the residue of a terrible act. This energy, this potent cocktail of fear and pain, becomes a psychic parasite, seeking a host, seeking a way to perpetuate its existence. When you bring such an object into your home, you are not just decorating your space. You are potentially inviting an entity that has known nothing but despair and malevolence. The creaking door that announces an unseen presence, the whisper that brushes against your ear when you are alone. These are not figments of your imagination. They are the subtle yet undeniable manifestations of this encroaching darkness. The deeper you delve into the nature of fear, the more you realize that it is not a passive emotion. It is an active force, a beacon that attracts things that thrive in its miasma. These places, these objects, they are simply conduits. The true horror lies in the recognition that this malevolent energy is not bound by physical laws. It can permeate, it can infect, it can grow, and the more it feeds, the stronger it becomes, its influence extending beyond the immediate confines of its origin. It's like a stain that spreads, no matter how much you scrub, a shadow that lengthens as the light recedes. The feeling of persistent restlessness that washes over you after hearing these tales is not just your mind trying to process the information, it is your primal awareness, acknowledging the proximity of something truly terrible, something that desires your attention, your fear, your very essence. This darkness, once invited, is exceedingly difficult to banish. Now, picture this in your mind. A home that was once filled with warmth and laughter, now a silent monument to a tragedy that no one speaks of. The family that lived there, once vibrant and full of life, is now scattered, haunted by a presence that clung to them like a shroud. It started subtly, of course, a misplaced object here, a fleeting shadow there. Then came the whispers, indistinct at first, growing clearer, more menacing, as the entity fed on their growing unease. Doors would slam shut with violent force, lights would flicker and die, leaving them plunged into an oppressive darkness that felt alive. The children began to have nightmares, vivid accounts of a tall, skeletal figure with eyes like burning coals, standing at the foot of their beds. The parents, initially dismissive, found themselves succumbing to a pervasive sense of dread. They heard footsteps pacing the hallways when they were alone, felt cold breaths on the back of their necks, and saw fleeting movements in their peripheral vision, always just out of clear sight. This entity, born from a festering wound in the house's history, perhaps a betrayal or a violent act, was not content with mere torment. It sought to consume. It began to isolate the family, turning them against each other with subtle manipulations, whispering doubts and accusations in their minds. The father grew paranoid, seeing threats where there were none. The mother became withdrawn, paralyzed by a nameless terror. The children, caught in the crossfire of their parents' unraveling sanity and the direct onslaught of the entity, began to exhibit disturbing behaviors. They would stare blankly at walls for hours, their small bodies trembling, and spoke of a dark friend who told them secrets no child should ever know. The very air in the house grew heavy, thick with an almost palpable sense of despair, making it difficult to breathe, making it impossible to find peace. The breaking point came one night during a raging storm, a night that mirrored the tempest within the house. The youngest child, a girl named Lily, was found in the basement, surrounded by her toys, humming a discordant tune. When her mother, Sarah, rushed to her side, she saw that Lily's eyes were different. They held an ancient, knowing gaze, and her voice when she spoke was not her own. It was deep, resonant, and laced with a chilling malice. "He wants us to stay," the voice rasped from Lily's small frame. "He likes the games. He likes the fear." Sarah felt an icy dread grip her heart, a premonition of an irreversible descent. The entity had fully manifested, using her child as its vessel, its purpose no longer just to haunt, but to possess, to claim. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a tomb, and the family, its unwilling inhabitants. What nobody tells you openly is that these manifestations are not random occurrences. They are calculated. They are driven by a hunger that is as old as time itself. The entities that reside in these blighted places, or that attach themselves to cursed objects, are not simply residual energy. They are intelligent, malicious entities that feed on fear, on despair, on the very life force of those who cross their path. They are the shadows that lengthen when your guard is down, the whispers that fill the silence when you are most vulnerable. They are drawn to emotional turmoil, to unresolved pain, to the cracks in the human psyche. And once they find a foothold, they seek to expand their influence, to draw others into their darkness. The story of the family in the house is a stark reminder of this predatory nature. They tried to leave, of course, but the house itself seemed to resist. Doors would lock themselves, windows would refuse to open, and the car keys would inexplicably vanish. It was as if the very structure of the manor had become an extension of the entity's will, a prison designed to keep them within its suffocating embrace. The whispers intensified, no longer confined to the night, but a constant murmur in their ears, driving them further into paranoia and despair. They saw apparitions more frequently now, shadowy figures lurking in doorways, spectral faces peering through windows, always just at the edge of vision, always disappearing when looked at directly. The air grew colder, a perpetual unnatural chill that seeped into their very bones, a chill that no amount of heating could dispel. The father, in a fit of desperate rage, tried to burn the house down, convinced that destruction was the only way to escape. But as he tried to light the first match, the flames, as if alive, licked back at his hands, searing him and sending him staggering back. The house seemed to laugh, a low guttural rumble that vibrated through the floor. The entity was too deeply entrenched, its roots intertwined with the very foundations of the manor, its power amplified by years of accumulated suffering. They were trapped, not by physical barriers alone, but by a psychological and spiritual prison. The entity fed on their fear, their desperation, their dwindling hope, growing stronger with every passing moment. The final act of this tragedy played out in the suffocating silence that followed the storm. Sarah, driven by a mother's primal instinct to protect her children, managed to gather them in the dead of night, their small hands clutched tightly in hers. She believed that if they could just reach the edge of the property, the entity's hold would weaken. But as they crept towards the front door, the air turned impossibly cold, and a deep, resonant voice, amplified by the very walls of the house, echoed around them. "You cannot leave," it hissed, a sound that scraped against their very souls. "You are mine now." The door slammed shut before them, and the shadows in the hall seemed to deepen, to coalesce into a towering, grotesque form, its eyes burning with an ancient, malevolent hunger. The last thing Sarah heard before the darkness consumed them was the stifled cries of her children, swallowed by the insatiable void. This is the grim reality of places saturated with negative energy. They are not simply old houses with a few creaks and groans. They are battlegrounds where malevolent forces contend for the very souls of the living. The story of that family, though harrowing, is not unique. Similar tales echo in the hushed corners of the world, whispered warnings of places where the veil between realms is worn thin. These entities, these architects of despair, thrive on our fear. They are drawn to it like carrion birds to a corpse. The feeling of unease that lingers after hearing such accounts is not merely psychological discomfort. It is a primal alarm bell, a recognition of a danger that lies just beyond the familiar. It is the cold breath of the abyss on the back of your neck, a reminder that the darkness is always watching, always waiting for an opportunity to claim its next victim. And this is where the narrative shifts, from the haunting of places to the haunting of the self. For sometimes, the intrusion is not external. Sometimes, it is a subtle corruption, a gradual erosion of one's own identity, facilitated by forces that operate on a spiritual or psychic plane. These are the tales that truly unsettle, because they blur the lines between the external threat and the internal disintegration. It begins with a whisper, a fleeting thought that doesn't feel entirely your own. You might dismiss it as stress, as an overactive imagination, but these whispers are like insidious seeds. planted in the fertile soil of the mind, designed to grow into something monstrous. They prey on insecurities, on past traumas, on dormant fears, twisting them into actionable impulses. Consider the accounts of individuals who, seemingly out of nowhere, developed obsessive behaviors, destructive urges, or a profound detachment from their loved ones. They describe a feeling of being a passenger in their own body, their actions dictated by an unseen force. It's like looking into a cracked mirror, where your reflection is distorted, alien, yet undeniably you. The voice, once a subtle suggestion, becomes a commanding presence, its demands growing more dire, more terrifying. These are the moments when the internal becomes the external, when the battle for one's soul is fought in the silent chambers of the mind. The shadow that was once at the periphery now resides within, growing larger, more defined, threatening to consume the light entirely. I recall a story of an artist, once renowned for his vibrant and uplifting work. He began to change after acquiring an antique locket at a flea market. The locket, he later learned, belonged to a woman who had met a tragic end, consumed by jealousy and despair. Soon after, his art began to shift. The bright colors faded, replaced by dark, brooding hues. His subjects became grotesque, unsettling figures that seemed to writhe with an inner torment. He became reclusive, his once warm demeanor replaced by a cold, detached hostility. Friends who tried to reach him found him surrounded by an almost tangible aura of darkness, his eyes holding a disturbing emptiness. He spoke of hearing voices, of a constant gnawing despair that clung to him, urging him to create darker, more disturbing art, to embrace the void. This entity, this parasitic consciousness, thrives on negativity. It feeds on the emotional energy generated by anger, jealousy, hatred, and despair. The artist, with his sensitive nature and his deep connection to his emotions, became a prime target. The locket was merely the key, unlocking a door within him that allowed the entity to gain a foothold. It didn't just influence his art, it began to dictate his thoughts, his actions, his very perception of reality. He felt a growing alienation from his former life, his former self, as the entity's influence solidified, twisting his passions and desires into instruments of its own dark agenda. The vibrant spark of his creativity was being systematically extinguished, replaced by a chilling mechanical reproduction of despair. The ultimate tragedy in such cases is the sense of betrayal, not by an external force, but by oneself. The individual finds themselves acting in ways that are abhorrent to their core values, perpetuating cycles of pain that they themselves find horrifying. They are trapped between the person they know themselves to be and the monster they are becoming, their will eroded, their autonomy compromised. The dried blood on the metaphorical altar of their psyche is not from a sacrifice made willingly, but from the slow, agonizing evisceration of their true self. The creaking door in this internal landscape is the sound of their own essence being slowly, inexorably pushed aside. It's a silent, terrifying war waged within the confines of their own consciousness, with the ultimate prize being their very identity. The artist's descent culminated in him destroying his own studio, smashing his canvases, and denouncing his life's work as a lie. He claimed he was merely a conduit, a tool for a greater, darker purpose. He spoke of the entity's satisfaction, a palpable sense of power that coursed through him as he dismantled his own creations. His final days were spent in a state of profound melancholy, haunted by the echoes of the life he had lost and the chilling presence that now defined him. He became a hollow shell, a testament to the destructive power of unchecked negative energy and the vulnerability of the human psyche to its insidious influence. His story serves as a chilling parable, a stark warning of the unseen battles that can rage within us, battles where the stakes are nothing less than our very souls. And this is where the persistent restlessness you might feel now truly takes root. It's the dawning realization that the boundaries we perceive are often illusions. The darkness is not just outside, it can be within. And the entities that dwell there are not confined to folklore. They are real, and they are adept at exploiting the vulnerabilities that we all carry. What nobody tells you openly is that the most effective way to combat such intrusions is through a deep understanding and acceptance of one's own inner light, and a resolute refusal to surrender to the shadows. But achieving that state is a profound struggle, a constant vigilance against the subtle encroachments of despair. Listen carefully, because what comes next is crucial for your own self-preservation. The external world can be a mirror to our internal state. A place that feels oppressively dark or filled with unseen malevolence often reflects a similar landscape within the hearts and minds of those who inhabit it. Conversely, a strong, vibrant inner self can act as a shield, deflecting the insidious whispers of external negativity. Think of your mind and spirit as a sanctuary. If it is neglected, filled with the clutter of unresolved fears and anxieties, it becomes an open invitation to those who seek to exploit such weaknesses. If, however, it is tended, cleansed, and fortified with self-awareness and inner peace, it becomes a formidable fortress. The stories of possessions, of subtle influences, are not mere tales to send shivers down your spine. They are cautionary parables. They illustrate the profound connection between our inner world and the forces that exist beyond our immediate perception. When you feel that creeping dread, that sense of being watched, or the disquieting feeling that your own thoughts are not entirely your own, it is your primal self signaling an alarm. It is a call to reinforce your defenses, to reconnect with your inner strength, and to reject the encroaching darkness. The cracked mirrors we see in haunted places are often reflections of our own fractured inner selves, mirroring the external manifestation of internal turmoil. The narrative that follows explores the deep, often disturbing, symbiosis that can form between human vulnerability and entities that feed on psychic residue. It is a dance as old as time, a dangerous waltz between the seeker and the sought, the prey and the predator. The sheer weight of accumulated despair in certain locations, or within certain objects, can create an atmosphere so thick with negative energy that it becomes a tangible force, a magnet for entities that exist on the fringes of our reality. These are not spirits of the departed in the conventional sense. They are often entities that have never known light, beings that are pure malevolence, attracted to the emotional discharge of human suffering like moths to a flame. Consider the concept of psychic residue. Every intense emotion, every traumatic event, leaves an imprint, an energetic echo that lingers in the environment. In places that have witnessed centuries of suffering, war, or ritualistic abuse, this residue can accumulate to such a degree that it forms a sort of psychic vortex. This vortex acts as a beacon, drawing in entities that are attuned to these frequencies of despair and fear. They don't need to break down doors. They are invited in by the sheer density of negative energy. The air in such places is not just heavy, it feels dense, as if you are wading through a viscous invisible substance. The silence is not merely an absence of sound, it is a suffocating blanket, punctuated by the subtle manifestations of these entities, a disembodied whisper, a fleeting shadow, the unnerving sensation of cold breath on your skin. I remember hearing about an old asylum, one that had a particularly grim history of lobotomies and experimental treatments. Even after it was shut down, the local legends persisted. People who dared to trespass spoke of an overwhelming sense of despair that descended the moment they stepped inside, a feeling so profound it was difficult to breathe. They described seeing figures in the decaying wards, not transparent apparitions, but solid-seeming shadows that moved with unsettling speed, always just out of direct sight. One group of urban explorers, particularly brazen, claimed to have heard guttural chanting coming from the abandoned chapel, a place where no records indicated any religious services ever took place. They fled in terror, reporting that the temperature plummeted and the air became thick with a cloying metallic scent, like old dried blood. These experiences are not hallucinations. They are encounters with entities that are intrinsically linked to the residual energy of the place. The darkness in these locations is not merely a lack of light. It is a palpable presence, an active force that seeks to interact, to influence, and ultimately to consume. The cracked mirrors in the asylum corridors reflected not just decay but brief, horrifying glimpses of tormented faces contorted in silent screams, faces that seemed to stare back with an ancient knowing malice. The entity doesn't need to manifest fully. It operates through suggestion, through amplifying the inherent fears of those who enter, twisting their perceptions until they are trapped in a feedback loop of terror. This is where the concept of the haunted object finds its darkest expression. It's not just an item with a story. It's an object that has become saturated with so much psychic residue, so much concentrated despair or malevolence, that it acts as a focal point, an anchor for these entities. Imagine a piece of jewelry worn by someone consumed by hatred, or a weapon used in a particularly brutal act. These objects absorb the emotional energy, becoming conduits for that negativity. When such an object is brought into a new environment, it doesn't just bring its history, it brings its inhabitants. The creaking door that starts opening and closing on its own, the unexplained cold spots, the feeling of being watched. These are not signs of a place being haunted, but of an object actively projecting its dark influence. What nobody tells you openly is that these entities are not bound by physical limitations. They can exist independently of their original host or location, attached to these objects like a psychic parasite. They feed on the emotional energy of new owners, growing stronger, their influence spreading. The dried blood, the faint scent of decay, the subtle scratching sounds from within. These are not just remnants of the past. They are active manifestations of the entity's presence, its attempt to communicate its continued existence and its hunger. The more fear and unease it generates, the stronger it becomes, its grip tightening on its new environment and its unsuspecting inhabitants. The story of a cursed music box illustrates this point chillingly. Found in an antique shop, its intricate carvings depicting scenes of torment, it was purchased by a young woman who was drawn to its melancholic beauty. Soon after, her life began to unravel. She experienced vivid nightmares, always accompanied by a faint discordant melody that seemed to emanate from the music box itself. Objects in her apartment would move inexplicably, and a pervasive sense of dread settled over her home, a feeling of being constantly observed. The music box, when played, produced a melody that was beautiful yet profoundly unsettling, its notes seeming to carry an echo of sorrow and despair that resonated deep within her. The woman, initially dismissing these occurrences, found herself increasingly drawn to the music box, almost compelled to play it, despite the growing terror it invoked. She discovered, through fragmented historical records, that the box was crafted by a tormented musician who, driven mad by grief and obsession, had poured his despair into its creation, eventually taking his own life. The entity that now inhabited the box fed on the anguish it generated, using the music as a subtle, yet effective tool to lure victims into its sphere of influence. The scratching sounds heard within the box were not mechanical. They were the desperate, trapped whispers of the musician's tormented spirit, amplified by the malevolent entity that had claimed him. The more she listened, the more the melody seemed to invade her thoughts, becoming a constant, intrusive presence. Her own thoughts became darker, her moods erratic, mirroring the melancholic tune. She began to isolate herself, her friends noticing a chilling change in her demeanor, a vacantness in her eyes, that spoke of a soul slowly being eroded. The entity within the box was not just a passive inhabitant, it was an active manipulator, slowly siphoning her life force, her joy, her very essence, through the conduit of the music and the accumulated despair. The vibrant world she once knew was fading, replaced by a gray, oppressive landscape dictated by the relentless, sorrowful melody of the cursed music box. This is the insidious nature of haunted objects. They are not just passive vessels but active predators that seek to perpetuate their cycle of despair. The profound terror of such situations lies in the insidious nature of the contamination. It's not always a sudden, violent manifestation. More often, it's a slow creep, a gradual erosion of the victim's well-being, both physical and mental. The whispers become louder, the shadows more defined, the sense of oppression more palpable. The cracked mirror in the victim's life reflects a distorted image of themselves, a stranger staring back, hollowed out by the constant drain of their energy. The dried blood isn't always literal. It can be the metaphoric desiccation of their spirit, leaving behind a husk. These entities, these psychic predators, are masters of psychological warfare, using the victim's own fears and vulnerabilities against them. They don't need to possess a body to exert their influence. They can achieve the same devastating effect by slowly dismantling the mind and spirit. This brings us to the chilling reality of places and objects that act as conduits for malevolent forces, not just as passive sites of residual energy, but as active gateways. These are locations or items that have been deliberately imbued with dark intent, often through rituals or acts of extreme malice. They are not merely haunted, they are weaponized. They serve as focal points, amplifying and directing negative energies with a terrifying precision. The old tales of cursed artifacts and cursed lands are not just folklore. They are warnings from our ancestors who understood the tangible power of concentrated evil. These are the places where the shadows are deepest, where the silence screams, and where the very air crackles with an unseen hostile energy. Consider the legend of the Obsidian Mirror, an artifact rumored to have been crafted by a forgotten sect of sorcerers who sought to commune with entities from the deepest voids. It was said to be carved from a single piece of obsidian, polished to a terrifying sheen, its surface rippling with a darkness that seemed to absorb all light. Those who gazed into it were not meant to see their own reflection, but glimpses into a realm of primal chaos, a place where sanity frayed and malevolent beings stirred. The mirror didn't just show visions, it beckoned. It whispered promises of forbidden knowledge, of power beyond mortal comprehension, all at the price of one's soul. The legend spoke of individuals who became obsessed, staring into its depths for days, weeks, their minds disintegrating, their bodies wasting away, until they were nothing more than empty vessels, forever bound to the abyss it represented. The Obsidian Mirror was more than just an object. It was a portal, a deliberate tear in the fabric of reality, designed to draw in and give form to entities that would otherwise remain unseen. Its power lay not just in its ability to show disturbing visions, but in its active manipulation of the viewer's psyche. It amplified latent desires for power, for knowledge, for escape from the mundane, twisting them into obsessions that would lead the victim down a path of irreversible destruction. The dried bloodstains that reportedly marred its surface were not accidental. They were the remnants of those who had tried to destroy it, or perhaps sacrifices made to appease the forces it channeled. The creaking of the obsidian, the subtle shifting of its surface, were not geological anomalies, but the sounds of the gateway straining, of entities clawing at the veil. And this is not confined to ancient artifacts. Imagine a property, a patch of land, where unspeakable acts have been committed, not just once, but repeatedly over centuries. A place where rituals of sacrifice and dark worship have been performed. where the soil itself has absorbed the spilt blood and the agonized screams. Such land becomes a beacon, an amplifier for the malevolent forces it has been exposed to. The flora and fauna in such areas often exhibit unnatural behavior or deformities. The air carries a constant oppressive weight, and an unnatural silence pervades, broken only by the chilling sounds that seem to emanate from the earth itself. The warnings from the locals, often dismissed as superstition, are rooted in a deep intuitive understanding of the danger. They say that on certain nights, under the light of a blood moon, the veil over these cursed lands thins to nothingness. The ground trembles, and the shadows coalesce, taking on forms that defy natural explanation. These are not mere ghosts. They are the entities that have been summoned and bound to the land, or perhaps drawn to it by the sheer density of its accumulated negativity. The feeling of being watched is not an illusion. It is the gaze of countless unseen eyes, their malevolence focused on any living thing that dares to intrude upon their domain. The persistent restlessness that washes over those who have merely heard tales of such places is a primal recognition of a profound territorial evil. What nobody tells you openly is that these gateways, these conduits of darkness, are not always ancient or overtly sinister. Sometimes, they are created through a lapse in spiritual vigilance, a moment of profound weakness where a protective barrier is breached. A home built on disturbed ground, a family heirloom passed down without understanding its true history, can all become unintentional gateways. The subtle manifestations, the whispers in the dark, the unsettling dreams, the feeling of a cold presence, are the first signs that the veil is thinning, that something from beyond is attempting to breach the sanctuary of your reality. Listen carefully, because what comes next is a plea, a desperate whisper from beyond the veil itself. The stories I have shared are not mere fabrications for your morbid amusement. They are warnings. They are echoes from the other side, fragments of truth gleaned from experiences that have shattered lives and consumed souls. Each tale is a testament to the fact that the darkness is not an absence of light, but a potent, living entity. It resides in the shadows, in the forgotten corners of the world, and sometimes, alarmingly, within ourselves. The persistent restlessness that you might feel after listening is not a sign of your imagination running wild. It is your primal awareness, acknowledging the proximity of something truly ancient and profoundly malevolent. The fear that coils in your gut, the chill that races down your spine. These are not just emotional responses. They are the physical manifestations of your spirit recoiling from the encroaching abyss. The cracked mirrors you see in these narratives are not just symbols. They are reflections of the fractured psyche, the shattered sense of self that occurs when one has truly encountered the darkness. The dried blood, the cold ashes, the creaking doors, these are the sensory anchors that ground the abstract horror into a tangible reality, reminding you that these are not just stories, but fragments of lived nightmares. They represent the residue of broken lives, the lingering presence of what should have remained buried, and the constant, unnerving reminders that the boundary between our world and theirs is far more fragile than we dare to believe. And this is where the true horror begins to manifest within you. Because the more you listen, the more you engage with these narratives, the more you are opening yourself to their influence. It is a dangerous dance, a seduction by the unknown, a morbid curiosity that can lead you down a path from which there is no return. The lines between observer and participant blur, and the darkness that you witness begins to seep into your own consciousness. The whispers you hear in the dead of night are no longer just a narrative trope. They become personalized, insidious suggestions that play on your deepest fears and insecurities. The shadows at the periphery of your vision are no longer just tricks of the light. They are fleeting glimpses of entities that are now aware of your attention, your fear, your growing fascination. The persistent restlessness that settles into your bones is the primal alarm of your spirit, sensing an encroaching threat. It's the body's instinctive reaction to the unknown, a desperate attempt to heighten your senses and prepare you for an unseen danger. But in the context of these tales, this restlessness is also a sign of attraction, a morbid pull towards the very darkness you ought to fear. You are not just listening, you are being drawn in, your mind becoming a fertile ground for the seeds of terror to take root and grow. The stories are designed to resonate with the dormant fears and anxieties that reside within each of us, amplifying them until they feel overwhelmingly real. The narrative itself is a form of gateway, an incantation of sorts. By immersing yourself in these accounts, you are inadvertently tuning your consciousness to a frequency that aligns with the entities and energies described. It's like a forgotten frequency on an old radio, suddenly picking up a signal from a distant, unsettling source. The goal is not just to tell stories, but to evoke a genuine emotional and psychological response, to create a lingering unease that forces you to question the nature of reality and your place within it. The feeling of dread that lingers long after the narration ends is the true mark of the story's success, a testament to its ability to penetrate the mundane and touch upon the primordial fears that lie beneath the surface of everyday life. The transformation that occurs after witnessing these visions is not always immediate or dramatic. It is often subtle, a slow erosion of comfort, a lingering doubt that casts a shadow over perceived safety. You might find yourself checking the locks more frequently, scrutinizing shadows, or feeling an inexplicable aversion to certain places or objects. These are not signs of madness, but rather the natural consequence of having glimpsed the terrifying truth that lies beneath the veneer of normalcy. The persistent restlessness is a constant companion, a reminder that the world is not as benign as it seems, and that unseen forces are always at play, waiting for an opportune moment to make their presence known. The cracked mirrors we encounter in these narratives are in essence reflections of this newfound unsettling awareness. Therefore, as you leave this space, remember that the darkness is not merely a backdrop to our lives. It is an active participant. It whispers, it watches, and it waits. It seeks out the cracks in our resolve, the vulnerabilities in our spirit, and the quiet moments when our guard is down. The unease you feel is a sign that you are beginning to understand, to perceive the edges of a reality far more complex and terrifying than you previously imagined. It is the first step towards acknowledging the persistent gnawing attraction to the unknown that lies at the heart of these tales. If this dark message was meant for you, then the echoes will continue to follow, whispering from the spaces between your thoughts. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness, adding another layer to the tapestry of shared dread. Do not dismiss the persistent restlessness, the chilling realization that some truths are best left buried. They are the echoes of souls who have ventured too far, who have seen too much, and whose warnings linger in the ether, seeking those who are willing to listen. The stories are real, the fear is palpable, and the darkness is always closer than you think. Consider this not an ending, but a transition, a moment where the veil thins and the whispers become clearer. The night is long, and the shadows hold many secrets, waiting for those brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to seek them out.